The trade truce between the United States and China, which was reached in October, seems to be coming to an end. Beijing has threatened to reinstate all sanctions and tariffs in response to the White House's recent ban on Chinese drone sales in the United States. Washington stated that this decision was made due to a national security threat. And the Pentagon immediately added that China is in the process of, quote, a historic military buildup, increasing the threat to the United States of America. The Pentagon report says that China's military is becoming more advanced and resilient, learning from Russia's mistakes in Ukraine and increasing pressure on Taiwan. In addition to this, global diplomacy has finally turned into a battlefield today. And today, at the United Nations Security Council, China and Russia officially presented a united front against Donald Trump's policies. The topic of the meeting is the naval blockade of Venezuela, but in reality it was about who would set the rules of the game in the new world. Beijing and Moscow harshly criticized the actions of the United States, officially calling them intimidation, and now analysts insist that this word, intimidation, has become a key term in the vocabulary of the new Cold War. So, let's break down the latest news about the confrontation between the United States and China in this episode. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and leave any comment under this video. This really helps a lot in promoting the episodes on YouTube, and I would be grateful to you for that. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pichi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. Let's begin with the argument at the United Nations Security Council. China's Deputy Permanent Representative Sun Lei gave a speech in New York that's already considered nearly historic. He accused Washington of destroying the remnants of international law and turning the world's oceans into a zone of arbitrariness for a single superpower. This refers to the United States blockade in Venezuela, which we discussed in detail in the previous episode. Now the Chinese claim this is lawlessness and piracy, saying Americans act as they please across the world's oceans. And here the question arises, why is China so fiercely defending Venezuela? It's all about money and resources. The blockade imposed by Trump, his 25% tariffs, hit China just as hard as they hit Maduro's regime itself. China has invested tens of billions in the Latin American region, and now Trump is effectively confiscating these investments by forbidding ships from leaving the ports. For Xi Jinping, this is not just a trade dispute, it's an existential threat to his influence in the global south. Russia, represented by Vasily Nebenzia, supported these accusations at the United Nations, calling the actions of the United States cowboy diplomacy that has no place in the modern world. Who is he to say that? The unwashed Russian Nebenzia is commenting on what fits in the modern world. I think we all understand exactly who doesn't belong in the modern world. There are over 140 million of them. Moscow is trying to play on Beijing's side, but realizing that it could be the next target of the blockade, by the way, and the conflict is expanding every minute. Washington is not just blocking the ports, it's imposing fines on the entire supply chain. Trump directly stated, quote, "We will no longer feed those who work against us." This is a declaration of full economic war on Beijing for backing dictatorships worldwide, including Moscow and Caracas. For now, it's a careful suggestion, a warning, but nevertheless, I think those who needed to hear it did. And this statement, which was made today at the United Nations, means that the organization in its current form is no longer able to prevent any conflicts. Ukrainians have long understood this, but many in the West still haven't. But in fact, the United Nations has become an impotent organization. While Chinese and Russian diplomats are shouting about intimidation, American ships continue to escort seized Venezuelan tankers. Essentially, we are seeing the strengthening of these two parallel worlds. One is the Western coalition, still, I guess, under the leadership of the United States of America, which acts with force and sanctions, but still relies on the international law that was developed after World War II. And the other is the alliance of China, Russia, and all those other authoritarian, dictatorial henchmen who are trying to create their own order, but through some shadowy schemes completely disregarding the international order. But in reality, this conflict over Venezuela is just the tip of the iceberg. The government of China has called on the United States of America to stop the false practice of adding all foreign drone systems to its new blacklist, and has promised to protect the rights and interests of Chinese drone manufacturers. China's Trade Department accused the American government of using the concepts of national security and state power in recent years to suppress companies from other countries, including Chinese ones, and called such actions a typical example of protectionism and market distortion. As stated in Beijing, if the United States continues to act unilaterally, China will firmly take the necessary measures to reliably protect the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies. What is this about? The fact is that the Federal Communications Commission of the United States has banned the import of new models of foreign-made drones into the American market, recognizing them as a risk to national security. In particular, the Commission has blacklisted the world's largest drone manufacturer, the Chinese company DJI, which produces these Mavic drones. And according to specialized market research, it holds about 70% of the global market for drones and components for their production. And now, new DJI drones can no longer enter the American market at all. But that's not all. The Pentagon has issued a new report on external threats to the United States, stating that China is undergoing a historic military buildup, increasing the threat to the United States. The document states that China's military is becoming increasingly advanced and resilient, learning from Russia's mistakes in Ukraine and increasing pressure on Taiwan. Intelligence notes that while Beijing and Moscow have strengthened their strategic partnership, mutual distrust hinders their cooperation. For example, China has a large arsenal of long-range nuclear maritime strike capabilities, as well as cyber and space capabilities that can directly threaten America's security, according to the Pentagon report. In addition, although the pace of nuclear weapons production in China has slowed, by 2030 Beijing plans to have more than 1,000 nuclear warheads. In addition, China is ahead of the United States in the development of hypersonic weapons. In response, the United States plans to deploy the Iron Dome system, designed to protect against these and other innovative threats, as well as more traditional ballistic missiles. In addition, the Pentagon report says that China expects to be able to wage and win a war against Taiwan by the end of 2027. And it should be added here that earlier, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated that Russia and China could launch a simultaneous coordinated attack on Europe and Taiwan. At the same time, he noted that China could pressure Russia to keep Europe occupied, specifically in Europe, so that NATO would not be able to help, for example, Taiwan. And here it should come as no surprise that China and Russia are so actively trying to protect Venezuela at the United Nations. Let's start with China. Why do they need this? The thing is, it's China that imports more than 600,000 barrels of oil per day from Venezuela, which is the majority of Venezuela's daily production. It's important to recognize that China has essentially taken Venezuela hostage. After all, in exchange for oil, China gives the Maduro regime loans and then takes that very oil as repayment for those loans. So it's a kind of circular scheme. As of today, Caracas's debt to Beijing, according to official information, amounts to $70 billion. On the other hand, Venezuela is also a market for Chinese technologies. Many weapons come from China, and the telecommunications infrastructure is largely based on Chinese components. Moreover, Venezuela's authoritarian nationalist socialism aligns well with China's. From a third perspective, it was beneficial for China that the United States spent years opposing Venezuela in the Caribbean Sea, because this way the United States is distracted from the Indo-Pacific region. Now, under Trump, they've decided to get rid of Maduro as quickly as possible and move on. This no longer benefits China. It was helpful when the United States was always distracted by Venezuela. Moscow, by the way, is also interested in using its allies in Latin America to influence the situation and thus challenge United States dominance. Russia is currently the largest supplier of weapons to Venezuela. In addition, when there was a real risk of Nicolas Maduro being overthrown in 2019, Russia sent 2 military transport planes with soldiers and equipment to Caracas to protect Maduro. Moscow essentially saved Maduro at that time. But now, of course, the Russians can't do anything. At most, they can express concern. That's why China and Russia are so furious about the United Nations. Everything here is logical, but now it's interesting to see how this will turn out, because it's obvious that besides making statements, they will also try to somehow influence the United States of America. And, As we understand this is already turning into quite a large global conflict, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Friends, if you found this episode useful and interesting, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or a paid sponsorship subscription through the links and details in the description of this video. Thank you for any support. That's all for now. Take care and goodbye. To be continued.